Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I was standing at the stove, the hum of the extractor fan almost mocking in its steadiness, when my phone buzzed on the countertop. I glanced at the screen. Rochelle. It was Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary weekday when dinner plans feel like a routine chore rather than a shared ritual. I lowered the heat under the pan, its edges of oil rippling like a captured storm, and picked up the phone. The message was short, almost clinical in its detachment. I need space. Don't contact me for a while. I'll reach out when I'm ready. The knife in my hand froze mid-chop. I watched the onion slice tremble, its layers suddenly transparent to my shock. No build-up, no argument beforehand, no late-night phone call thick with tension. Just this text, delivered with surgical precision. We'd been married 3 years, living together in the condo I owned, sharing breakfasts and bills and Sunday morning coffee runs. I'd thought marriage was a promise of continuity, not an invitation to vanish without warning. I tapped back, my thumb hovering. Okay, take all the space you need. The words felt brittle, like dried petals crumbling in my fingers. I wiped them away and sent something more neutral, I understand. Then I set the phone face down and returned to the onions, but the rhythm was gone. Each chop felt laborious, like slicing through lead instead of vegetable. I moved methodically. Seasoned the chicken, stirred the sauce, arranged the vegetables, yet my mind churned. I replayed our last few days for any sign of trouble. Had I missed something in her tone? A lingering sigh as she watched me at the sink? A glance at her phone I didn't understand? But nothing stood out beyond the usual ebb and flow of married life. She'd been quieter lately, sure, but I chalked it up to stress at work or fatigue after her night classes. By the time the door clicked behind me, I was halfway through plating the food. I set 2 portions on the table, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, rice seasoned with saffron. It was our favorite combination, chosen on lazy weekends when we pretended calories didn't count. I sat down, fork in hand, and stared at the half-eaten meal. The silence between us yawned impossibly wide. I waited until 9 before I texted again. Are you okay? There was no reply. I checked my email, scrolled social media, even browsed news headlines, anything to distract myself, but by 10 I was back at the table, staring at the phone as if sheer will could summon her response. Then I deleted the unanswered messages. If she needed space, I would give her space, even if it felt like stepping off a cliff blindfolded. For the next 3 days, I moved through a fog. I drove to work without recalling the route, sat in meetings and nodded along while my thoughts drifted. I ate at my desk because cooking felt like making a monument to her absence. I walked into our bedroom and found her side of the closet empty. No dresses or shoes to soften the reality that she might never return. I resisted the urge to call my sister, who lives 3 states away, resisted checking in with friends for updates, resisted dialing the landlord to ask if she'd packed up or slipped out in the night. I told myself silence was respect. But each passing hour felt like another layer of ice settling over my chest. On Thursday afternoon, I tried to focus on work. It wasn't until a ping from my phone broke me open. I unlocked it to see an Instagram notification. Rochelle had posted something new. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tapped her profile and froze. There she was, glowing on the deck of a white yacht, the sunlight catching her hair like spun gold. She was wearing a 2-piece bikini, the color coral. My favorite color on her. In one hand she held a wine glass, in the other she held the railing, as if balancing triumph and ease in perfect measure. And beside her leaned Trent, her ex-boyfriend, the same man she swore years ago never to see again. My stomach turned to stone. My vision blurred for a moment, and I had to sit down before I toppled to the floor. I stared at the caption, written in carefree script. Healing looks good on me. Healing. A word she'd never uttered when I stayed up late, drying her tears after rough days, or whispered promises that I'd stand by her no matter what. Healing looked good on her now on some luxury yacht, sipping rose among unfamiliar waves. The image mocked me. Her laughter caught mid-smile, his arm around her waist, the horizon dissolving behind them. I closed my eyes and breathed in sharply, as if a lungful of air could clear the betrayal lodged in my throat. I scrolled back up, looking for context. No tags, no geolocation, only that polished portrait of a life I thought I shared. I checked the date, 3 days ago, right after she'd asked for space. I tapped her name again, then tapped it once more, expecting grace, explanation, perhaps remorse. But her feed offered nothing but that single defiant post. I felt the world tip. The walls of our condo seemed to shift, as though my home had betrayed me too. I stood up, shaking, and walked toward the balcony, opening the sliding glass door to let in a breath of cooler air. The city lights blinked at me in oblivious comfort, traffic pulsing below like arteries carrying indifferent life. I closed my eyes, leaning against the railing, letting the night hold me. My mind replayed every late night conversation, every shared sunrise, every vow we made. And in that quiet moment, I realized I wasn't the one who broke. She did. She ejected me from her life so cleanly, so decisively, and turned our shared history into mere chapters of a story she no longer wanted to finish. I drew in a slow breath, tasting the salt of tears I didn't let fall. My jaw tightened. My heart, numb by shock, started to beat again, steady, determined. I turned from the railing, stepping back into the condo that was mine. The oil burner hissed softly in the kitchen. The table rustled as the breeze moved a napkin. Everything awaited my decision. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and squared my shoulders. My stomach still felt like stone, but beneath it, something warmer stirred. A quiet conviction that I would not wilt under this message. I would respond, not with panic or pleas, but with resolve. And so, with the echo of her words hanging in the air, I took the first step toward reclaiming my life. Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected calm. I woke before sunrise, the air inside the condo still cool and crisp, as if the walls themselves had exhaled relief. My head throbbed faintly, a remnant of restless nights chasing the echoes of Rochelle's departure. I padded into the kitchen, poured strong black coffee into a mug, dark as my thoughts, and turned it over in my hand like a talisman. Today, I decided I would show her what distance truly meant. I fetched my keys and slipped out into the quiet parking garage beneath the building. The Lexus SUV sat where she had parked it the night she left, tires turning brittle near the concrete curb. I'd bought it 8 months ago to surprise her. Her credit was too shaky to qualify, so I'd taken the title, loan, and insurance in my name. I remembered the smile that had broken across her face when she first slid into the driver's seat, running her hand along the dashboard as if it were a new luxury cruise. That memory cracked something inside me now, but I ignored it. I drove home the night she disappeared, glancing at the empty passenger seat and fighting the urge to check my phone for a message. Nothing came, but this morning I would take control. I had already called a reputable dealership, arranged an appraisal for late morning, and prepared to let the SUV go. A clean break, sold to a stranger who would never know what it once meant to me. The drive to the dealership was smooth, the city streets still dormant at 7 a.m. I parked under a row of fluorescent lights and stepped out, stretching my shoulders against the chill. The dealership lot glimmered with cars waiting for new owners, their paint fresh and windshield spotless. A salesman greeted me with rehearsed enthusiasm. He led me through the inspection, checking tires, engine noises, interior trim. I listened without emotion, standing straight as he nodded approval. Good condition, low miles. You'll get a fair price. I signed the paperwork and watched him process the sale. $300 I'd spent on the locks, another $4,000 coming for the SUV. Money, I reminded myself, was replaceable. Trust was not. As he handed me the cashier's check, I tucked it into my wallet and offered a curt nod. No small talk, no explanations. I drove away feeling a curious lightness, as though something heavy had been lifted from my shoulders. Back at the condo, I carried in groceries. Eggs, toast, coffee, fruit. Staples I knew she never touched. I placed them on the counter, the echo of her absence loud in the empty cabinets. Then I retrieved the locksmith's invoice, set it next to the groceries, and thought about the locks I'd replaced. 3 tumblers, a reinforced deadbolt, a new key cut for me alone. I tried to imagine how it must feel to turn a door handle and find nothing but cold metal where there had once been welcome. For the first time in days, I sat at our dining table and ate a meal that wasn't cold from disuse. I spread butter on thick toast, poured coffee into the chipped mug she'd complained was imperfect, and sipped carefully. The taste was bitter but honest. I thought of her message again, I need space, and realized I had given her space more absolute than she had imagined. She may have meant emotional distance, but I had taken it to its final conclusion. The condo, once shared, felt more mine than ever. I moved a chair to a new spot by the window, angled toward the morning light. I rolled up my sleeves and began clearing away remnants of our life together, cleaning out drawers, sorting stacks of magazines, folding her blankets and placing them in a box to await collection. I made no attempt to hide this process. Every movement announced my declaration that this home would no longer accommodate absence. By noon, the empty box stood by the door. I texted Rochelle a single line. "Your things are boxed. Let me know when you'll collect them." Then I muted her number. No pings would break my silence. I poured another cup of coffee and settled onto the couch, feeling a calm I'd not known since that first message 3 days ago. The monotony of routine, of coffee and chores, seemed to steady my resolve. In the afternoon, I tackled more deliberate changes. I slid open the blinds in the living room, letting sunlight flood the corners of the space. I replaced the throw pillows on the sofa. Hers were bright floral patterns, mine were solid gray. I rearranged photographs on the mantel, landscape shots from my childhood instead of our wedding pictures. Each small act felt like laying bricks in a new foundation, one built solely on my terms. A knock at the door startled me around 3. I opened it to find no one, only a small box left by a courier. Inside lay a note from a mutual friend, Denise, offering help and understanding. I tucked the note into my pocket, grateful but not swayed. This was my journey. I closed the door and continued my work, dusting shelves, mopping floors, reclaiming every inch of space that had once held her presence. Night fell and I cooked again, roasted chicken, simple salad, glass of wine. I ate alone, unabashedly so, and the quiet no longer felt like an empty echo. Instead, it felt like an invitation to breathe, to exist without apology. I poured the last of the wine, swirled it in the glass, and raised a silent toast to the space I had created. Before bed, I surveyed the condo. The locks were changed. The car was gone. Her belongings waited for pickup. The apartment looked different, less like a halfway point and more like home. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark, its notifications silenced. For the first time since her message arrived, I felt in control of my own story. I lay down and closed my eyes, the hum of the air conditioner a lullaby of autonomy. Distance, I had learned, was not mere absence. It was the power to decide who belongs in my life. Rochelle had asked for space, and I had answered in full measure, carving out a life where I alone am the architect. As sleep claimed me, I understood that this distance was the beginning of something new. The reconstruction of my world, built on boundaries I set and respect I command. The knock came at 9:12 p.m., precise and insistent, rattling the newly reinforced deadbolt above my head. I was on the couch, phone muted and screen dark, finishing the last chapter of a novel I'd picked up at the bookstore to distract myself. The words on the page blurred as the pounding continued, adrenaline jolting me upright. My heart hammered against my ribs, each thump echoing how I felt about this entire ordeal, vindicated, yet wary of escalations. I rose and crossed the hardwood floor, pausing at the door to check the chain lock. It was a gesture of habit, a ritual of protection. I slid it into place and cracked the door open, keeping the chain latched. Rochelle stood on the threshold, silhouetted in the hallway light. Her tin skin glowed against the dark building corridor. She wore the same distressed jeans and a white blouse I'd bought her on our 3rd anniversary. Her hair was pulled back, unruly strands framing a face I recognized too well, wide-eyed shock giving way to anger. "Malik," she cried, voice catching with a tremor that seemed rehearsed. "My key's not working. What happened?" She took a small step forward, but I held the door firm. The chain rattled with her movement. I looked at her calmly, as though she were an unexpected visitor at my own front door rather than the partner who had ejected me from our life together. "I changed the locks," I said, voice level. "You wanted no contact." I honored that permanently. Her expression flickered, disbelief and outrage knitting her brows. She swallowed and raised her chin. "That was supposed to be temporary," she said. "I never meant you to lock me out forever." I leaned back, resting my shoulder against the door. The chain guaranteed neither of us would enter the other's space until I chose to remove it. "Your message said, 'Don't contact me for a while. I'll reach out when I'm ready.'" I respected that request in full. Her lips quivered. She raised her voice, demanding to know where the Lexus was parked. "You sold my car too?" she spat. The accusation landed like a slap inside my chest. I'd anticipated this, had prepared for every possible line of attack. "Sold it," I replied quietly. I drove it to the dealership Saturday morning. Payment cleared. It was mine to sell. She blinked, as if expecting the car to suddenly reappear. You can't do that, she whispered. It's my car. It never was, I said, and the words cut sharper than any knife. I held title, loan, and insurance. Payments you made were for usage, not ownership. The sale is final. Her chest heaved. She reached out as if to push past me, but I tightened my grip on the doorknob. Let me in, she demanded. We need to talk. I shook my head and closed the door an inch, the chain catching with a metallic click. This conversation ends here. If you want your things, send a pickup time by text. I'll leave them in the hallway. Her eyes brimmed with tears, angry, resentful, desperate tears that did nothing to soften the resolve I saw behind them. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce pride in how far I'd come from the man who'd sat trembling at the kitchen table 3 days ago. She swallowed and covered her face for a moment, as though wiping away the illusion of control she'd held over me. When she lowered her hand, her sister Sierra appeared behind her, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. Rochelle glanced back, blinking to compose herself. Sierra? I said, raising an eyebrow. You must be here for backup. Sierra squared her shoulders and met my gaze. You can't do this to her, she said, voice steady. Change the locks and sell the car. This is her home. This was our home, I corrected, until she chose to vanish and post Instagram photos with her ex. I'm giving her the courtesy of letting her reclaim her things without disturbance, but you and she will not cross this threshold. Sierra's jaw clenched. She took a single step forward, placing herself beside Rochelle as though forming a united front. You're being cruel. You know she's upset. I'm being practical, I replied, and pressed one finger against the door, gently nudging it closed while keeping the chain on. You can collect her belongings when she decides on a pickup time. Until then, this door stays locked, and I stay where I belong, in my own home. Rochelle's voice cracked as she shouted, This isn't over. Sierra echoed the sentiment in a harsher tone, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in their stance. The chain held them at bay, both physically and symbolically, the protective barrier I'd built to safeguard my peace. I watched them storm off down the hallway, the click of their heels fading into the distance. My breath came slower now, less ragged, as the tension drained from my shoulders. I unlatched the chain and opened the door fully, peering into the empty corridor. The boxes of her clothes, shoes, and personal items sat neatly stacked against the far wall, waiting for her to claim them. I stepped back inside and let the door close quietly. The condo felt still, as though it had been holding its breath through the confrontation. I moved to the boxes, running my hand across the top one, a collection of things that once carried the weight of our shared life. Now they were just objects, devoid of the power to hurt me. I left them where they were and walked to the window to look out at the city lights. On the street below, shadows shifted as cars passed. People moved on with their own lives. In the distance, the glow of signs and street lamps formed a mosaic of everyday continuity. Nothing would pause for the upheaval of one relationship. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. The air smelled faintly of the takeout I'd ordered earlier, garlic, basil, melting cheese. I realized I was hungry but unafraid, alone but resolute. Rochelle had tested old boundaries, but I had redrawn them in permanent ink. Behind me, the boxes stood silent. Ahead of me, an open world awaited, one where I controlled who entered and who remained locked out. And in that knowledge, I found a measure of peace I hadn't thought possible 3 days earlier. The door, my door, was secure. My heart, now fortified, felt ready for whatever came next. Morning light filtered through the slatted blinds as I prepared myself for what I was pretty sure would resemble a circus more than any ordinary Sunday. I'd spent the night before arranging the boxes of Rochelle's belongings neatly along the hallway outside my condo, each carefully labeled and taped shut. By sunrise, the corridor was lined with suitcases, duffel bags, and cardboard cartons, a small convoy awaiting collection. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, its steam curling upward in lazy spirals, and considered my plan: remain inside, observe quietly, and let events unfold. At precisely 10 o'clock, a knock rattled the door so hard the framed photo of my childhood home trembled on the mantel. I peeked through the peephole to see Delilah, Rochelle's mother. Flanked by Sierra, who held an armload of what looked like decorative pillows, and Rochelle herself, seated in the passenger seat of a silver sedan idling in the courtyard. Outside, Delilah's minivan idled behind, windows tinted to shield its occupants from the morning sun. This was family pickup day, a formality they'd insisted on, a grand gesture of retrieval after my decisive actions. I opened the door just enough to show the boxes lined in the hallway. Delilah's face registered shock at the sight, a neat row of personal effects that had once been decorative touches in our shared life. Sierra shifted the pillows in her arms as though they were armfuls of cash rather than sentimental cushions. Rochelle sat in the car, arms crossed, her legs folded and ankles turned inward, an expression of simultaneously contained anger and hurt. Delilah stepped forward and uttered her rehearsed pleasantries, voice pitched too sweetly to mask her indignation. "Malik, dear, surely we can work this out. We've driven all the way from her mother's house to collect these things. There's no need for hard feelings." She glanced inside the condo, looking for displacement or disarray, and found none. My living room remained exactly as I'd arranged it, Spartan, functional, unyielding to her expectations. I nodded politely. "Your daughter's items are right here. Please take them." My tone held no invitation for negotiation. Delilah's lips pursed. She shifted her purse on her shoulder and stepped closer, her perfume, a heavy floral scent, filling the doorway. "Rochelle's nowhere else to stay until we figure this out," she said, as if that entitled her to invade my space. Behind her, Sierra scowled, her eyes flicking between me and the stacked boxes. "I'm sorry, but this is my home," I replied. "Rochelle will have her things. She can arrange a time to pick up what she needs." I held her gaze, refusing to be cowed by her presence. Delilah huffed, then gestured toward the boxes as if they were evidence, not belongings. "Fine. But you must know how hurtful this is." She reached for the first box labeled clothes, and I watched as Sierra joined her, taking two smaller boxes, one marked shoes, the other accessories. Rochelle watched them select her items with an unreadable expression, neither relief nor regret. The hallway shrank as they carried the boxes out, the clicking of cardboard bottoms against tile echoing in the lobby. I stood just inside the door, hands tucked into the pockets of my jeans, heart thudding with a mixture of triumph and residual tension. It was strange. Watching them reclaim what they claimed was rightfully theirs didn't fill me with sympathy. Instead, I felt the weight lifting from my chest with every box removed. Delilah paused mid-step and turned to me, arms laden now with two more boxes. "Once you return her car, maybe things will be different," she said. The comment was loaded, suggesting my actions had severed more than locks. They'd severed any hope of reconciliation. I met her gaze without flinching. "The car sale was final," I said. "Title, loan, and insurance were all in my name." She had space. She took it. That was her choice. Rochelle's voice cut through the tension as she spoke from the car. "That's enough, Mom." Her tone was sharp, tinged with frustrated relief. "Let's just finish this." She opened the car door, emerging in well-worn sneakers and a lightweight jacket that bore my zipper pull, one of the few objects I'd quietly left behind. She lifted a box of books, its sides crumpling slightly under the weight, and took a deep breath as she closed the door behind her. Sierra loaded the remaining boxes into Delilah's minivan. Delilah drove the sedan, and Rochelle followed behind in silent protest. I watched them line up at the exit and wheel out into the street, a convoy that marked the end of their claim on my space. Only then did I feel the final, hollow echo of her absence settle in the empty hallway. I closed the door, reattached the chain, and exhaled deeply. The silence that followed was a stark contrast to the drama I'd witnessed. I moved back into the living room, every footstep resonating in the emptiness. I passed the spot where we once shared morning coffee, where her mug had sat beside mine. I touched the coffee table lightly, imagining her sitting there, arguing about weekend plans or reading a book. The absence was palpable. To reclaim my environment fully, I decided to reconfigure the space. I gathered the decorative pillows she'd once chosen and placed them in a laundry basket destined for the donation center. I shuffled the furniture to face a different angle, angling the couch toward the window instead of the wall where her art prints once hung. As I did this, I realized the condo was no longer ours. It was failing to accommodate her presence, giving way to my own needs and aesthetic. By afternoon, the apartment felt open. Light poured in from the windows, bouncing off the freshly painted walls. I brewed another pot of coffee and poured a second mug, savoring the rich aroma that no longer carried memories of shared sips. I sat down with my laptop and began researching local painters and furniture stores, noting color swatches and layout ideas I'd never dared explore before. Later, I stepped onto the balcony with a cold beer in hand and gazed at the sunset. The skyline wore its golden hour glow, and the city hummed its evening refrain. I felt a softness in my chest, a quiet peace I hadn't known was possible, born not from romance or companionship, but from the clarity of solitude. As dusk settled, I stood shoulder to shoulder with my own reflection in the sliding glass door. The man staring back at me was not the one who froze at that first message on Tuesday evening. He was someone taller, steadier, someone who had reclaimed his home and his heart. The family pickup circus might have come and gone, but the real procession was the one I held inside. Grief, anger, resolution, and finally, acceptance. Night had fallen, and the condo felt unnaturally quiet. I stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator as though it were a makeshift companion. My phone lay on the counter, its screen face down, notifications muted. I told myself I'd earned this respite, no more tears, no more frantic calls. But then it vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You piece of... I flipped it over. Sierra's number. Before I could delete, another buzz. Rochelle's name flagged through Sierra's phone. You betrayed me, it read bluntly. I locked the screen and set the device aside. An hour later, the text came flooding in. First from Rochelle's number. How could you? We had something real. Then from Sierra. You'll regret this. Everyone's going to know what kind of man you are. Next, a new thread from her mother Delilah. You've broken our family. You'll pay for this. They fired off messages faster than I could read them. I felt my chest tighten. Anger, irritation, grief. Old emotions I thought I'd processed. I reached for my phone and opened Rochelle's most recent text. It threatened legal action. You're going to hear from my lawyer. I'm being advised to pursue emotional distress compensation. I closed the app and breathed out sharply. I hadn't replied. I didn't intend to. Silence had been my greatest ally so far. Moments later, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole. No one was there. A cardboard envelope lay on the welcome mat. I opened the door, hesitated, then picked it up. My name was scrawled on the front in spidery handwriting. Inside was a flyer, Stop the Abuser, with Rochelle's picture beneath. The words fake news scrawled in red across the bottom made clear that this was her latest smear campaign, an effort to tarnish my reputation among mutual friends and neighbors. I let the envelope flutter to the floor and shut the door. My heart pounded as the scope of their plan sank in. They weren't content to call and text. They wanted to drag me through mud publicly. I paced the living room, mind racing. Who would believe what? My condo building was small, word spread fast. I could already imagine whispers in the lobby, curious glances from the mailman, concerned check-ins from neighbors I barely knew. But I had allies. I thought of Micah, Denise, Khalil, the ones worth explaining to. I pulled out my phone, unmuted notifications, and opened my group chat with them. Within minutes, Denise messaged back, ignore it. You know the truth. We've seen how unfair she's been. Micah, if she starts trashing your name online, let me know. I can back you up. Khalil, I've got your six, brother. Don't let them gaslight you. My chest eased at their solidarity. I deleted the flyer from my screen and slid it into the trash. Then I pulled up a blank note and typed a short message to everyone else who messaged me. Rochelle's airing personal grievances. I have the legal documents to prove my actions were lawful. I won't engage further here. That felt good, clear, factual, unassailable. I had sinned. Later, as I unpacked a fresh bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a truly bad day, I realized this was exactly that. I poured a single measure into a glass and held it up to the light. The amber liquid glowed, warm and inviting. I took a sip, letting the burn map its way down my throat, sharp, honest. The next morning, I awoke to more notifications. Social media alerts, friends asking if I was okay, others inquiring what had happened. I opened Instagram to see a string of comments under my last post. Concerned emojis. We're here for you. Don't let her drag you down. I paused, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't need to explain my side publicly. My private circle knew the facts. I closed the app and picked up my schedule for the day. Work at 10, gym at noon, legal counsel appointment at 3. The lawyer, a steady-voiced woman named Alicia, had called to say she'd drafted a cease and desist letter ready for Rochelle's attorney. I felt my pulse steady. This was control, not chaos. At the gym, I pounded the treadmill belt with force, imagining each step shaking off their accusations. Sweat poured down my temples, cataracts of physical exertion washing away mental strain. I left the gym exhausted but triumphant, muscles pleasantly sore, mind clearer than it had been in days. Back at the condo, I showered and dressed for my meeting. I reviewed the cease and desist draft. It laid out timelines, legal precedents, and the consequences of further defamation. I added a note highlighting the flyer dropped at my door as evidence of continuing harassment. Satisfied, I printed copies and tucked them into my briefcase. At 3 o'clock, Alicia greeted me in her office lobby with a firm handshake. We reviewed the paperwork, and she warned me that Rochelle's lawyer might counter with frivolous motions but that our position was rock solid. I left her office with a sense of relief so palpable it felt like air rushing back into lungs that had been holding their breath. That evening, I walked home by way of the waterfront. The river was wide and dark under the city lights, its surface reflecting neon flickers, a mosaic of chaos made graceful. I leaned against the railing and let the breeze carry away the weight of the past days. Rochelle's campaign of guilt text and smear tactics was merely a last-ditch effort to shift blame. It wouldn't stick. Back in the condo, I changed into comfortable clothes and prepared dinner, grilled salmon, quinoa salad, a simple meal that underscored my autonomy. As I minced garlic, I realized I hadn't cried or shaken or felt panic since I responded to Denise's messages. My emotions were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they no longer dictated my actions. I sat at the table and scrolled through my contacts, considering who else might need a heads up. I decided on a brief message to my landlord, Troy. If you hear any complaints, this is an ongoing personal matter with an X. No lease violations on my end. I appreciate your understanding. I hit send. Finally, I turned off my phone notifications and set it aside. I lit a single candle on the table and ate by its glow. The flickering light cast dancing shadows across the walls, and I let it remind me that peace often arrives through small gestures. When I finished, I washed the dishes and stacked them to dry, then walked to the balcony. The night sky was clear, stars pricking the darkness. I stood there, arms at my sides, breathing in the cool air. The world felt expansive again, beyond the reach of those guilt-laden texts and smear campaigns. In the quiet, I realized that Chapter 6 of this ordeal, the stretch of relentless messages, defamation attempts, and emotional warfare, had taught me something crucial. I could endure attacks without losing myself. The boundary between respectful space and malicious intrusion had been tested, and I'd held firm. I went back inside, extinguished the candle, and chose a new book from the shelf, one without memories attached. As I turned the first page, I understood that their campaign would fade, just as the candle's flame had. The ringtone of my phone in the middle of Thursday afternoon was a jolt, sharp, insistently loud in the quiet of my condo office. I glanced down at the screen. Troy, my landlord. My stomach clenched. After the smear campaigns, the guilt texts, and the flurry of attorney letters, I braced myself for every eventuality except this. I hit answer and lifted the phone to my ear. Hey, Malik, Troy said, his voice steady but cautious. You got a minute? I leaned back in my chair, folding one leg over the other. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across my desk. Of course, Troy. Everything okay? He inhaled, as though gathering courage. I've had a complaint. I felt the air thicken. About noise? I asked, recalling the perfectly still nights since I'd changed the locks. Not exactly, he said. Somebody called the management office. They claimed they heard disturbances, drama, from your unit last night. A faint pulse of adrenaline surged. Disturbances? I echoed. I was here alone, working late. No noise beyond typing and the occasional door click. He paused. I get that. I just wanted to check in before anything serious happens. You haven't had any unpaid rent or anything like that, right? I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. No, rent's paid. Always has been. And I haven't had anyone staying over. It's just me. Troy's tone softened. Good. Look, I don't want to hassle you, but the caller was pretty insistent they heard shouting, maybe an argument. Could be someone else in the building, but they thought it was coming from your floor. I massaged my temple, considering how best to reassure him without unleashing details of my personal turmoil. I understand. I'll be mindful of noise. But I assure you, I've been alone, and the only thing raising my voice lately has been my lawyer. I managed a calm chuckle. No arguments here, just paperwork. He chuckled softly on the other end. All right, Malik. If I hear anything else, I'll let you know, but I trust you're handling it. Thanks, Troy, I said. I appreciate the heads up. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. My heart still fluttered, but this was far from the collapse I'd feared. The complaint could be the neighbor's unfortunate mishearing of my occasional muttered arguments with myself as I drafted email responses to Rochelle's texts. Or maybe some deliberate echo from her camp. Either way, it was nothing a calm conversation couldn't solve. I stood, stretched my arms over my head, and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. There, a few tenants lounged by the pool, oblivious to my internal storm. The building's swirl of everyday life. Mail being delivered, people chatting, someone's distant laughter reminded me that this condo was my space to protect, not a battlefield for their vendettas. Deciding to preempt further misunderstandings, I drafted a short email to Troy. Thanks for letting me know. I've had no guests lately, and I'll keep noise minimal. If you receive any more complaints, please check with me before taking action. I'm available to clarify immediately. I hit send and felt the weight lift from my shoulders. It was a small step, but it reaffirmed my control over this space. Later that afternoon, my best friend Imani swooped by unannounced, carrying her laptop and a bag of snacks. I greeted her at the door, grateful for the distraction. She shrugged off her jacket and dropped onto the couch. How's the war zone? She asked, eyeing the empty hallway and pristine living room. I laughed, the sound a release valve for lingering tension. My landlord thinks I'm hosting cage matches in here. I told her about Troy's call. She sipped from a soda can and frowned. Classic smear tactic. Spill rumors of noise. Get you in trouble. Exactly, I said. So I wrote him a note. Clear the air. I gestured to my desk. Sent it already. Imani nodded approvingly. Smart move. Transparency wins. She booted up her laptop. Now, let's take your mind off this for a bit. I found a great new podcast on urban gardening. Thought you might like to start that balcony garden you mentioned. I sank back into the couch cushions, feeling the corners of my mouth lift. You're a genius. Let's do it. As she clicked through seed catalogs online, I felt normalcy return. The tension from the call receded in the collective excitement of dirt, planters, and hydroponic possibilities. That evening, I carried 2 potted herbs, basil and mint, to the balcony. The concrete beneath my feet felt solid and mine. I arranged the pots along the railing, lining them in the slanted orange glow of the sunset. I pressed the soil around the roots, whispering encouragements to the tiny green leaves. I could almost hear Imani's voice in my head. Growth is your new focus. When the city lights flickered on below, I peeled off my shirt and changed into shorts. I stepped onto the balcony again, glass of water in hand, and surveyed my handiwork. 2 specks of promise against the urban skyline. My landlord's call felt like a ripple in the larger pond of my life. Annoying, but nothing more. I could manage ripples. I could steer my own boat. A soft ping from my phone reminded me that the world beyond my condo still buzzed. Another text from Troy. Thanks for the note. All clear here. I smiled and replied. Thanks for understanding. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket. I leaned against the railing, inhaling the scent of warm concrete and fresh herbs. The city below hummed. A reassuring backdrop to my reflection. I thought of the days since her message broke me and all the steps I'd taken to rebuild. Changing locks, selling the car, standing up to her family, countering texts and smear flyers. Now, even the landlord complaint had been neutralized with honesty and a few typed sentences. I closed my eyes and let the breeze wash over me. The basil leaves brushed against my arm as though in greeting. I realized that I had moved from reactive to proactive. No longer at the mercy of her whims, but charting a course defined by my own decisions. It wasn't just about protecting my space. It was about cultivating it, nurturing life here, deciding what grew and what withered. As the night deepened, I stepped back inside, flicked on a lamp, and settled at my desk to draft an email to my team at work. Business as usual. The day's drama had come and gone, and now I was back in the driver's seat. I typed confidently, fingers gliding across the keys. A week passed. The text stopped. The calls ceased. For the first time in what felt like a century, silence wasn't heavy, it was earned. I'd handled the emotional grenades, the social sabotage, and even the landlord. Curveball with more control than I'd thought possible. I was getting used to the quiet again, until the envelope came. It arrived in a plain manila package, thick and unnecessarily formal, dropped through my mail slot like an afterthought. I picked it up from the floor, thumbing the seam as I turned it over. No return address. Just my name, Malik Carson, typed in bold, sterile letters. That alone told me it wasn't from someone who cared about how I'd been. I didn't have to open it to know it was from Rochelle's side. Still, I did. Inside was a letterhead from a small-time legal office I recognized from Google weeks ago. One of those bottom-of-the-barrel shops that sold hope in hourly increments. Rochelle's name was listed as the aggrieved party. The letter was thick with exaggerated language, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion of property, financial exploitation. Then came the kicker. They were demanding $10,000 in damages, citing the sale of the Lexus SUV and pain and suffering caused by being locked out of the shared residence. I laughed, one dry, bitter exhale. Not from amusement. From disbelief. Rochelle had cried on yachts, posted thirst traps in designer swimsuits, and now wanted to rewrite history as if I had left her stranded barefoot on a dirt road. The letter tried to sound threatening, but it was poorly constructed. The lawyers cited vague legal concepts without actual case law, and their so-called evidence consisted of Rochelle's version of events, full of holes and missing context. I dropped the document on my kitchen table and poured myself a glass of water, trying not to let my pulse rise. But I was already reaching for my phone. Alicia, my lawyer, answered on the third ring. "I've been expecting this," she said, not missing a beat. "Send me the letter. I'll respond by morning." I scanned it and hit send. By noon the next day, she had already fired back a response, calm, concise, and crushing. She attached copies of the Lexus title and sale documents, bank statements proving I paid for everything, and screenshots of Rochelle's healing Instagram post with Trent. Most importantly, Alicia included a cease and desist warning. Further harassment, defamation, or legal posturing without merit would be met with a formal restraining order and a civil counterclaim. 2 hours after that, Alicia called me again. "It's handled," she said. "I doubt they'll respond. That letter was a scare tactic. They've got nothing." I didn't respond at first. I just stared out my window at the city below, listening to the hum of passing cars. When I finally spoke, it was slow and steady. I knew they were desperate. I didn't think they'd stoop that low. Alicia didn't say anything for a moment. Then, with quiet confidence, she replied, "People like Rochelle rely on chaos. You removed her ability to control the narrative. Now she's grasping at anything that might shake you." I ended the call with a thank you and set the phone down. That night, I allowed myself a moment of pause. No work, no planning. I sat on the couch, legs stretched out, remote in hand, flipping through shows I used to watch with Rochelle. I stopped on a documentary, one about rebuilding after natural disasters. Seemed fitting. I watched cities get razed, then raised again, stronger and smarter. That was me now. That was the mission. The next morning, I went for a run. Not because I wanted to escape, but because I could. For blocks, my feet pounded pavement, rhythm steady, breath sharp. Each stride felt like a new kind of exhale, releasing frustration, betrayal, and whatever residue Rochelle's name still left on my skin. When I returned, the manila envelope was still on the table. I picked it up and tossed it into the trash with deliberate ease. The sound it made hitting the bin was small, but final. I wiped my hands as if removing her touch from the air. That evening, Imani came by again with takeout and a mischievous grin. "Heard from your ex's lawyer yet?" she asked, dropping a brown bag on the counter. "Yep," I said, pulling out plates. They swung. Missed. Alicia knocked them back into last Tuesday. We ate on the balcony, the city pulsing beneath us like a heartbeat. I told her about the letter, Alicia's clapback, and the eerie silence that followed. Imani shook her head and said, "She's out of ammo, Malik. Her only weapon now is nostalgia. Don't let it get to you." "I won't," I said, and I meant it. Later that night, I sat in bed, lights off, the room quiet except for the gentle buzz of the city outside. I thought about all the energy Rochelle had poured into trying to flip the story. How none of it worked. She'd underestimated me. Thought I'd fall apart without her. But I didn't. I adapted. I fortified. The legal letter was supposed to scare me. Instead, it reminded me that I had the facts, the documentation, and, more than anything, the will to protect my peace. Rochelle's world operated on impulse and vanity. Mine? Now it ran on boundaries and truth. As I turned off my phone for the night and slid it onto the nightstand, I smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a gloating smile. It was the quiet kind, the kind that comes when you know you've survived something built to break you. She tried lawyers. I had the law. She tried manipulation. I had clarity. She tried to rewrite the story. I lived the truth. And that made all the difference. I don't know who told me first. Maybe it was Micah, or Denise, or someone's shared story on Instagram that flicked past my screen like an afterthought. But the whispers started trickling in. Rochelle was back in her hometown. The news wasn't official. There wasn't a big announcement or tearful post. Just a slow erosion of her presence here, her social media going quiet, her name disappearing from the local circles we used to float in. And then a tagged photo in her cousin's story, her face barely visible in the background of a family barbecue 2 states away. A far cry from the yacht and the wine and the healing she once flaunted. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, rereading a message from Denise. She's not with Sierra anymore. Word is, they got into it over rent. Rochelle was freeloading. Sierra snapped. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not out of cruelty, but because of the irony. Rochelle, who once scoffed at small-town living and said she'd never go back to that place, was now back in the very town she swore she'd escaped. All that running and posturing, all that staged independence and strategic silence, had looped her right back to where she started. I heard she tried staying with Sierra for a week. That lasted 5 days. Sierra wasn't built for martyrdom, and Rochelle wasn't built for humility. The story goes that Rochelle refused to split bills, hogged the bathroom, and treated the apartment like a hotel with room service. Sierra kicked her out one morning after a blow-up involving spilled wine, a broken vase, and Rochelle insisting she'd earned her rest. No Jordan, either. The second Rochelle came back from her healing trip and found her car gone and my number blocked, he started to vanish too. She tried texting him, then calling, then tagging him in posts. Eventually, she deleted the photos they'd taken on the boat, the ones where she leaned against his chest like she was finally free. But the damage was already done. And Jordan? He was never built for storms, just good weather. And her job? Last I heard, her supervisor had a quiet talk with her about showing up late, missing deadlines, and looking distracted. Without a car, Rochelle was relying on ride shares and borrowed grace. But that runs out quickly when you're unreliable and surrounded by coworkers who don't care about your sob stories. I imagined her sitting on her childhood bed, the posters long gone, the wallpaper faded. I pictured her scrolling through old pictures of us, looking for a version of herself that still held power. But that woman didn't exist anymore. Not here, not in this life she tried to rewrite and failed to protect. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Quietly, intentionally. The condo had transformed. I'd repainted the walls, soft gray in the living room, a deep navy blue in the bedroom. I replaced the throw pillows with ones I actually liked. Bought myself a new rug, a small record player, and a few vinyls that filled the silence with soul and smooth jazz. My mornings were mine now. No passive-aggressive sighs, no silent treatments over imagined slights. Just sunlight, black coffee, and peace. Imani came by with paint supplies one weekend, and we tackled the balcony like it was a project that mattered. She laughed when I picked out plants I couldn't pronounce and teased me about Googling low-maintenance greenery. But when we finished, it looked like a sanctuary. One evening, Khalil and Denise came over. We cooked, talked, and sat on the balcony until midnight, trading stories and sipping whiskey. I told them everything. How Rochelle had filed that absurd claim, how Alicia had obliterated it, how the silence afterward had been the loudest victory I'd ever experienced. They listened, not with pity, but with admiration. She thought you'd fall apart, Khalil said, swirling his glass. But man, you built a whole new version of yourself. She burned her bridge, and you paved a damn highway. That line stuck with me, because it was true. Rochelle had assumed I'd wait, that I'd crumble, that I'd chase her, beg for clarity, or offer up some pathetic olive branch after she ghosted me and flaunted another man like a trophy. She wanted to test the water and come back to find the same man standing on the same dock. But I wasn't there anymore. I'd drained the water, burned the dock, built a better home inland, surrounded by good people and better choices. One night, I checked her social profile, curiosity, not weakness. It was private now. The glowing captions were gone. The yacht posts deleted. Her last photo was a quote. Sometimes you don't realize how much you lost until the silence hits. No comments. No likes. I locked my phone and placed it face down. She wasn't wrong. Silence hits different when you've burned all the voices that cared. The next morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead just outside the city. Hiked 5 miles to the overlook. The sky opened up there, and the world felt wide, like nothing and everything all at once. I sat on a flat rock, letting the wind wash over me, and thought about what it meant to move on. Not just emotionally, but spiritually, mentally. To move on doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means growing taller than it, stronger, more precise. It means knowing that sometimes the best closure is your own peace. Rochelle may still be telling stories, spinning her grief into a narrative that paints her as the abandoned one. Let her. Those who matter know the truth, and those who don't matter. I had nothing left to prove. She lost the comfort she thought she could leave and reclaim at will. I gained a foundation she never valued. And as I stood on that overlook, sun cutting across the valley below, I realized I no longer needed to check if she was okay. She made her choices. So did I, and mine finally felt like home. 2 months later, I stood in the center of my living room, a paint roller in one hand and silence wrapped around me like a warm shawl. The walls were no longer the soft beige Rochelle had insisted on. The ones she said made the condo feel more romantic. Now, a calm, smoky gray stretched from floor to ceiling. It wasn't romantic. It was peaceful. And it was mine. The condo looked different, not just because of the paint, or the new furniture, or the strategically placed plants I'd learned to keep alive. It felt different. It pulsed with a quiet dignity that had taken weeks to rebuild. Gone were the scented candles I never liked. Gone were the floral print pillows, the motivational wall art, the decorative trays that served no purpose. I'd cleared the space of her taste, her presence, and, most importantly, the energy she left behind when she walked out with a text and returned with an Instagram scandal. The floors were clean. The air was clear. My name was on the lease. My hand had picked every item in the space, and there was no one left to ask for permission. That was what peace looked like, not perfection, but autonomy. I stepped back and admired the TV stand I'd assembled the night before. Sleek, black metal with wooden accents. Minimal. Sharp. The old one, a white and gold piece she'd begged for on her birthday, was long gone, donated to someone else's story. I mounted the flat screen above it, placed my Bluetooth speakers on either side, and queued up some Coltrane. The jazz filled the room slowly, like steam rising off fresh coffee. I sank into the leather armchair I'd picked up from a warehouse sale and let the saxophone notes drift over me. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I hadn't heard from Rochelle since her legal attempt fizzled out. Not a text, not a call, not a knock at the door. Silence. And yet, I knew that silence wasn't peace on her side, it was shame. Maybe regret. Maybe the weight of realizing that the backup plan she tried to keep warm me had cut the power and closed the door. It wasn't just the locks that had changed. It was me. The man she once left standing in the kitchen, holding his phone and blinking at a text that tore his world apart, was gone. In his place stood someone firmer, clearer, less eager to rescue anyone who wouldn't swim on their own. I respected her request for space, and I gave it to her. In abundance. Infinity, even. She once told me, early in our relationship, that the reason she loved me was because I made her feel anchored. But what she really meant was she loved the idea of security, not the responsibility it came with. She wanted the benefits of being loved without the work of staying loving. And when it got hard, she left, easily, quietly, selfishly. That was the thing that stayed with me the longest, not the betrayal, not the yacht photos, not the ex-boyfriend in her stories. It was the ease. How simple it had been for her to step away from what we'd built. As if our vows were receipts she could throw out after the return window passed. But now, that he's worked both ways. I was done reminiscing. I didn't replay conversations anymore. I didn't stare at old pictures. The reminders that used to sneak up on me, the scent of her perfume on a blanket, the voicemail I forgot to delete, the shoe she left behind in the back of the closet, they were gone. Every single thread connecting me to her had been trimmed with care and finality. A soft knock at the door made me pause the music. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Green, standing there with her usual warm smile. She held a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic. Just wanted to say it's been so quiet next door lately. Peaceful. Whatever storm you were weathering, you came through it with grace, she said kindly. I chuckled, accepting the plate. Thanks, Mrs. Green. It's been a journey. She patted my shoulder like a proud aunt. Sometimes, life clears people out of your way on purpose. When she left, I placed the cookies on the kitchen counter and smiled. That was the thing about healing. It didn't come with fireworks or grand announcements. It came quietly. It looked like grocery runs without anxiety. Mornings where I made coffee without feeling the urge to check my phone. Nights when sleep wasn't interrupted by dreams of someone walking away. It looked like repainting a room. Like buying furniture that fit my taste. Like music that played without memories attached. Later that night, I sat on the balcony under a clear sky, sipping ginger tea and watching the traffic lights flicker below. I looked around the condo, now aglow from the new floor lamp I'd ordered, and I knew. I didn't just survive Rochelle's departure. I transformed because of it. She thought she was walking out on a man who would chase her, who would collapse under the weight of abandonment and come crawling back the moment she offered crumbs of affection. But I didn't. I took the hit, sat with the pain. Then I got up. I changed the locks, sold the car, redrew every boundary. She lost more than she thought. Not a car, not a condo. She lost the quiet loyalty of a man who showed up, a man who stayed, a man who loved her without condition and gave her space, even when it shattered him. I didn't break. I bent, and then I rebuilt. Quietly, powerfully, on my terms. As the stars flickered overhead, I leaned back in the chair, letting the night hold me. No guilt, no anger, no lingering questions. Just peace, painted in fresh colors, seated on new furniture, played to the soundtrack of my own damn freedom.